Would you wait a decade for a 33,233% return on an investment? Well, one top investor says he will wait for XRP, and I can't help but wonder, does he know something that we don't? Now, I remember scrolling through X, Twitter with a new paint job, when I saw this bold claim flash by. A prominent investor that I follow, this is Armando, basically said that he is fine waiting 10 plus years for XRP to hit $1,000. Now, my first reaction was, no way, that's just gotta be insane. 10 years in crypto can feel like a century. At least most of us can't even hold a coin for 10 weeks without getting a bit jittery. But here, at least there was actually something about his confidence that hooked me in. And I found myself reading the whole thread, right? My coffee going cold as I tried to digest the very idea. The replies under Armando's post were a curious circus in itself. Some people were typing in all caps, this, XRP to the moon, while others were like, dude, put the Kool-Aid down. I saw a GIF of a skeleton sitting on a bench with a caption waiting for XRP to hit $1,000. Ouch. It was a mixed bag of hype and skepticism, basically reflecting the entire crypto community's split personality on XRP. Now, you know that feeling when a claim sounds absurd, but you just have to know where it's actually coming from. And well, that was me. I was so intrigued that I hopped into our free educational Discord server to ask, am I crazy or did someone really say the XRP to $1,000? Now, people had their opinions, let me tell you. Some laughed it off, others said, hey, I've heard this before. So I decided right there and then, I'm going to investigate this little mini adventure. Now, if a guy willing to wait, a decade for a 33,000% gain, then I need to understand why, right? And trust me, what I discovered was more interesting than I actually was expecting. So first, who is this guy actually making the claim? Well, Armando is a pretty well-known crypto investor and commentator in the crypto space. Not a random moon boy. He's actually respected enough, that when he talks, people actually listen. Now, when I saw his name attached to an XRP $1,000 prediction, I had to do a little bit of a double take. In his post, he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, XRP to $1,000. Not tomorrow, not next year, but eventually, yes. Now, he straight up admitted that it sounded far off, but the kind of key word was eventually. And then he dropped the kicker, a 33,233% return. I'll wait 10 plus years for that. So 33,000%. Hearing it kind of phrased like that actually made me pause for a second. It's like saying that even if there's a chance to turn $100 into $33,000, just by being patient, why not wait? Still, it kind of sounds wild, I know. Now, I'm going to admit, I've heard outrageous XRP predictions before. I've covered on this channel quite frequently, right? Now, back in the day, there was memes about XRP hitting $589 by the end of 2018. Don't ask me why that specific number. It was a bit of an insider joke in the XRP community. I had friends in 2017 swearing that XRP would fund their Lambos by 2020. Spoiler, those Lambos never arrived. So yeah, wild price targets are nothing new for XRP, but hearing it from someone like Armando, a serious investor, not just some anonymous Twitter account with bot followers, that hit a little bit differently, right? It wasn't just hopium from an internet kind of random. It was a calculated stance from a guy with a track record. Now that made me perk up and actually consider it for once. Now, Armando's reasoning wasn't just blind optimism either. He pointed out that XRP is in a huge bear trap right now. Right, translation. The price is low and a bunch of people have given up, partly because of fear, uncertainty and doubt, and a little hefty dose of legal drama. Now, for years, XRP was stuck in the shadows of that SEC lawsuit against Ripple. The US SEC basically had XRP under a microscope, calling it an unregistered security. It was like a wet blanket on XRP's price while other cryptocurrencies were partying in the 2021 bull run. So imagine running a race with a parachute tied to your back. And that was where XRP, at least what XRP has been dealing with, right? And a lot of people panicked and dumped their XRP during those times. Now, Armando calls that all panic selling back to square one for XRP, right? He kind of thinks of the lawsuit kind of knocked XRP back down to its baseline, an undervalued state. And to be honest, I kind of get a point here, right? At least as of now, XRP is hovering around that $3 mark. It's been, pretty flat compared to, let's say, Bitcoin or Ether's roller coasters, right? And a lot of that was because investors were like, XRP might get labeled a security, better not touch it. But guess what? The case finally wrapped up and XRP got clarity that it's not considered a security, at least when traded on exchanges. And that was a huge win. It even took years, right? But I remember when that court decision came out, crypto Twitter basically threw a party. Now, XRP's price spiked hard on the news. Finally, some vindication, right? Now, though it wasn't an instant kind of trip to the moon or anything like that, but, symbolically, that ruling cut off the parachute that actually had been dragging XRP down. Now, it might be, or at least it meant the kind of big bad legal cloud was actually starting to clear and XRP could finally breathe once again. So here we have XRP, battle scarred from legal fights, chilling at a few bucks, while the big boys like Bitcoin have been kind of marching onwards. Now Armando is basically saying that now XRP can maybe even start its real journey, almost a bit like a reset. Now, he even kind of compared XRP's situation to Bitcoin's early days, right? This part kind of hit me, right? He reminded us all that Bitcoin took 8 years just to consistently stay above the $1,000 level. So let's think about that then, right? Bitcoin launched in 2009 and only around 2017 did it finally stop dipping below $1,000. Now, you can imagine holding Bitcoin for that long back then, right? Most people would have bailed and lost faith way before, year 8. But the ones who stuck around, well, we know how that turned out. Now, Armando is implying that XRP might be on a rather similar slow grind. It's had a big setback, just like Bitcoin had multiple crashes and setbacks in its first few years. But given enough time, maybe XRP could eventually reach that elusive $1,000 mark in the distant future. Not tomorrow, not next year, but maybe by, who knows, let's say 2030s sometime. And it turns out that Armando isn't the only one dreaming of the triple digits or quadruple digits. I found out that the COO of CryptoGuard, Matthew Brennan, predicted XRP could hit $1,000 by 2035. So yeah, he put an actual year on it. When I saw that, I kind of chuckled to myself, like, do these guys have a secret XRP moon club? Right, 2035 is a decade out, which lines up with Armando's 10 plus years mindset. It's kind of like they're all looking at the far horizon while the rest of us are checking our portfolio apps every 10 minutes. Now, I'm over here worried if XRP will break $10 in the next bull market, right, or bull run. And these dudes are already kind of planning for the 2030s, as if they have a time machine or something. And then there's the researcher named Anderson, who made more number-based arguments. He basically said, look, if Bitcoin can reach $1 million someday, then logically XRP could reach $1,000. And why? Because historically, XRP's price has been a tiny fraction of Bitcoin's. So at the time that he floated this idea, Bitcoin was around $115,500 per coin, and XRP was around $3. So if you do the math, that kind of lines up with the kind of proportionate way, right? If Bitcoin 10x's to $1 million, which in itself sounds crazy unless you're, hardcore Bitcoin maxi, maybe XRP could roughly do 333x to get near the $1,000. Now, Anderson basically says that if the king of crypto can pull off $1 million price tag, then the prince might tag along to $1,000. It's a big if, of course. Like my aunt had wings, then she would be a jet, right? But it kind of shows some people are crunching the numbers just to try to justify the dreams. And of course, they're tweaking to suit their narratives. All right. Now let's address the gigantic elephant in the room, the sheer scale of a $1,000 XRP. Now I had to double check this because it's kind of mind-boggling here, right? With XRP's current supply, around 59 billion tokens, a $1,000 price tag would mean a total market cap of around $59 trillion. That was trillion with a T, and that is pretty big, right? How big is $59 trillion? Well, it's more than a GDP of most countries combined. It's more than the entire value of gold in the world, which is currently like 22 trillion or so. It's kind of more like more than Bitcoin at $1 million per coin, you know. Heck, it's $59 trillion is like Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and a bunch of other mega companies all rolled together and then doubled, right? It's an insane figure. No wonder that a lot of people immediately call BS on that $1,000 target. Now, one of those skeptics is at least a guy named Quinten, right, who hosts the 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗰𝗍 podcast. Now, he flat out said that aiming for $1,000 XRP is delusional. And honestly, when I saw his reasoning, I couldn't entirely disagree, at least at first, you know, but we're going to get into that. Now, he highlighted that the insane market cap that we've just talked about, basically pointing out that if XRP was to hit $1,000, its market value would be larger than the entire global stock market, right? Just pause and picture that for a second. Half of every publicly traded company on earth replaced by one cryptocurrency coin's value, right? It does sound pretty nuts when you frame it like that. And you can see why Quinten and a lot of the traditional finance people will roll their eyes at $1,000 XRP predictions. It's kind of like someone saying a single tulip bulb will be worth a mansion, right? It triggers your inner absurd alarms. But we've been through this many, many times, right? I've spoken about market cap myths for years, but let's go ahead and look at some new entrants. We've got Dom, right? The founder of a app called EZA. Now, Dom claps back at that kind of take, right? Calling it a kind of short-sighted perspective. Now, he basically kind of suggests that people like Quinten are actually thinking way too small, right? They're actually stuck in today's perspective. Now, Dom didn't lay out a kind of full thesis in one tweet, but reading between the lines, I think what he means, at least the world is changing, right? The financial system in 10 or 15 years might be totally different, possibly in a lot more value floating around in tokenized assets or digital currencies. In such a future, having a multi-trillion-dollar cryptocurrency might not be so outrageous. And my brain was like, okay, I literally kind of the global financial plumbing was, you know, rebuilt on blockchain. Yeah, and sure, the numbers would be huge. It was an aha moment for many, right? It went from these guys are crazy to they're crazy, but there might actually be a tiny chance that this world really does change. But let's go back to that market cap myth that I mentioned earlier, right? A lot of skeptics, they say $59 trillion is absurd. You'll never be able to do such a thing. It's bonkers. But they misunderstand what's actually driving the market cap, right? We can't look at market cap in the same way that we look at market cap for the stock market. Then similar kind of metrics are used, but there's very fundamentally different kind of layers at play. So within the stock market, you have real companies, real profit reports, real strategies that are being implemented that impact investors, whether they have confidence in a stock, whether they're going to be trading in and out of those stocks, right? Pretty basic stuff. Within the crypto market, though, there isn't a single company entity that's driving anything. That's the whole point of decentralized ethos here, right? Decentralization means that there isn't a single point of, you know, reporting or anything like that, right? Now, there are some exceptions. There are some centralized entities out there, but we're going to be mainly focusing on decentralized concepts here. Okay, so for us to truly understand market cap within crypto, we have to first of all understand that it's being driven from millions of people buying and selling, right? Speculatively buying and selling, or maybe even buying to use the actual cryptocurrencies, right? So unlike your kind of stock marketplace where you're buying as an investment, you're buying into the company and the progress of the company, and you want to earn profits from the company. You know, what that company does is going to impact your investments, right? But you don't have that concept here. Instead, you have market cap driven by the last traded price of a cryptocurrency multiplied by your circulating supply. Okay, so what's happening here? Let's say I bought XRP at 10 cents, which I actually ironically did back in 2020. Right? I paid 10 cents for my XRP. Today it's worth $3, right? But I only invested 10 cents. but I can now have $2.90 more. Now, in crypto and any market for that matter, money is never made. It isn't, just created out of thin air. It is only ever transferred between the different participants, meaning that if as a buyer and a seller, right, I bought at 10 cents and I sell at $3, well, someone is paying me $3 for my 10 cents coin, right? I take his $3 off of him and he takes my coin off of me. Now, what happens there is that it takes a lot less money to actually move the price action. For example, my 10 cents is still 10 cents, right? And I just persuaded someone to give me $3 for it. That's essentially the market. That means that a small amount of money can actually dramatically change the actual cryptocurrency pricing. For example, if we had, based on the order books today, about 10 to $15 billion of capital flowing into XRP instantly, as in all 10 to 15 billion drops right now on the market buys only, the price would shoot up to over $90 because there's not sufficient amount of selling pressure to prevent that amount of buying volume, right? It's the imbalance between the supply and the demand that controls the price, and it's the last traded price that dictates the market cap. So although $59 trillion sounds completely crazy, and it does sound crazy, it's not out of the realm of possibility given the actual metrics and the variables that control the very number itself. It isn't that $59 trillion of real cash actually exists. It'll probably only be a handful of a few $100 billion at best to drive out such astronomical numbers. I mean, who honestly thinks that there's over $2 trillion of liquidity in Bitcoin? That would just be crazy, right? If you started dumping all Bitcoin right now, you wouldn't be able to pull out more than a few $100 billion at best, I would guess. So really, market cap isn't what you think it is. And I think it's really important that retail investors don't get caught by that trap. Now, before you think I've gone full XRP maxi, I'm going to tell you at least I'm not going to tell you guys to bet the farm. Let me kind of drop a quick reality check here because this one might just shock you, but I'm not a financial advisor and nothing in this video is financial advice. Cryptocurrencies, they are highly volatile and you could lose all of the money that you invest. You should always do your own research and consult a qualified professional. After all, your investments are entirely your own responsibility, and you should know that nothing is ever guaranteed when it comes to investing. Neither I, this channel, nor YouTube are liable for any losses, and this video today is for entertainment and educational purposes only. All right, we had to get that out of the way, so let's go ahead and talk about what all of this means for someone like me and you, because honestly, this whole exercise made me reflect on my own approach to crypto. Now, here's the thing. I've always been more of a kind of midterm kind of guy in crypto. Hold for a couple of years or so, maybe 4 years at kind of max, take some profits and rotate into something else. That's the kind of thing, right? Now, the idea of waiting over 10 years for one investment to pay off, that sounds like kind of waiting for paint to dry. And, except you're probably actually hoping that the paint turns into gold by the end, right? It requires an insane amount of patience. But seeing people like Armando willing to actually play the ultra long game got me thinking, maybe that's how the big kind of wins really do happen, by having conviction when everyone else gets bored or distracted. I mean, look at Bitcoin's early adopters, or people who held Amazon stock right through the .com days, right? They were laughed at, called crazy, but some of them made out like bandits because they just waited. Now, I do personally think XRP, or do I personally think that XRP will hit $1,000? Honestly, I am still quite skeptical about that, right? It's okay to be, skeptical from times as well. I mean, I don't run, or just didn't run out and kind of put my life savings into XRP after reading the tweet that I saw. And please, whatever you do, don't do that either, right? But I did do something that I didn't expect. I increased my XRP moon bag just a tiny little bit because I realized that if this crazy scenario even has a small chance, then I wouldn't mind having a lottery ticket or two in my back pocket. Kind of like buying a couple of Powerball tickets, not counting on it, but it's kind of fun to imagine. And I'll forget about it for a long time, or a long while, right? And if it pays off in 10 to 15 years, fantastic. If not, hey, I wasn't relying on that money for, retirement or anything anyway. Actually, I kind of joked with a friend of mine that if XRP, hasn't hit that big payday by the time that I'm old and gray, I'll leave whatever I have to my grandkids along with the story. And hey, here you go, kiddos. grandpa once bet on a magic internet coin hitting $1,000. And I'm sure they'll just roll their eyes at old grandpa's crazy crypto tales. Now, what I loved about diving into this topic is that it kind of forces us all to zoom out a bit. Crypto, especially kind of Twitter and X, whatever you want to call it, is so full of these short-term noises, right? Moon next week, crash tomorrow. It's exhausting. But here we have some people who are basically saying, relax, just think about the decades, right? That's kind of the opposite of what the kind of usual mentality of crypto people do, right? And whether they kind of run or turn out right or wrong, I guess, that perspective is actually quite refreshing, right? It's kind of like a reminder that not everything has to happen overnight, right? We're so used to this instant gratification. I'm guilty of even checking prices, 10 times a day, etc., right? That we kind of forget that some of the big kind of takeaways are the gold pot, a pot of gold is further down the line, right? So kind of like a fine whiskey, right? You just can't rush it. You have to let it sit for years and hope that it turns out great. Now, another thing that made me realize, right, those of us in crypto often underestimate just how much that you can change within a decade. Let's think about 10 years ago, 2015. Ethereum was kind of barely even a thing. ICOs hadn't gone crazy yet. No NFTs, no DeFi, and Bitcoin was worth just a few $100, right? The whole landscape was different. Now, fast forward, we've seen booms, busts, regulations, innovations, and everything in between. So imagine 2035. There could be things in crypto and the world economy that we can't even foresee right now. Now, if XRP is a part of the big picture, who knows? It could play a role that no one expected, or it could fade away. Who knows? The point is, 10 years is a long time. Enough time for the impossible to maybe become possible. And who knows, by 2035, the world economy will be larger and inflated. Then maybe that'll even make $59 trillion feel a little bit smaller in context. Okay, it'll still be massive, but slightly less crazy than maybe it sounds today. So the point is, a lot can change over a decade. That's not a prediction, that's just humility, right, in the face of time. So here's my takeaway from this whole XRP to $1,000 adventure, right? It's kind of less about whether it will actually happen and more about the mindset behind it, right? The people waiting a decade or more for that moonshot, they have conviction, they have patience that's truly unusual in the face of fast-moving world of crypto. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be right. It just means that they're in it for the long haul. And there's actually something to learn from that, right? Even if you think $1,000 is pure hopium, of course. I mean, at the very least, this story made me stop laughing at the bold predictions so quickly, right? I still have to take them with a grain of salt, of course, but now I also ask, what if? And then do some research. Speaking of which, if you want to chat more about the crazy crypto ideas or just learn together, then hop into that free Discord that I mentioned earlier. It's completely free and it's full of people that love this stuff. And hey, I also checked out XRP on Kraken Pro. An affiliate link for that that supports the channel is also in the description down below, right? And I've got to say, seeing it at a few bucks, with all of the context in mind, kind of felt different. Kind of like I was looking at a sleeping giant, or maybe just a normal giant that's kind of finished growing. At least time will tell. And whether XRP ends up at $1 or $1,000 a coin, at least you'll have one heck of a story to tell either way. And for sure, crypto, it's just never boring. So don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next one.